November 4th, 1999. It was a cold, quiet night in Fairfield, Alabama. The kind of night when the world seems still, peaceful. But that stillness was shattered when police received a chilling call. A body had been discovered in the woods just beyond the Mitchell estate, a sprawling mansion owned by one of the town's most respected families. The victim was quickly identified: Stacy Mitchell, a beloved ballet dancer, wife, and mother. Her death wasn't just tragic, it was unthinkable. To the people of Fairfield, Stacy was untouchable, graceful, elegant, adored by all. And yet there she lay, lifeless among the fallen leaves. As word spread, shock rippled through the town. Who could have done this? And why? It was a question no one could answer. Not yet. But the truth, as investigators would soon uncover, was far darker than anyone imagined. At home, Stacy was the quintessential wife and mother. She had two beautiful children, Emily, 10, and Lucas, 8. Both adored her with the pure, unshaken love only children can give. Her husband, Robert Mitchell, was one of the most powerful men in the state, a real estate mogul who had built an empire from nothing. Tall, broad-shouldered, commanding, Robert was the kind of man who always seemed in control. His company, Mitchell and Company, was behind nearly every luxury development in the region, including the grand estate where the family lived. A sprawling mansion on the edge of town, surrounded by pristine gardens and thick woods that gave them absolute privacy. Together, the Mitchells were admired, envied, even idolized. In a place like Fairfield, where everyone knew everyone, they stood at the very top, respected, beloved, untouchable. Their smiles graced local magazines. They hosted charity galas, school fundraisers, and church events. People whispered about how lucky Stacy was to have the perfect husband, perfect children, perfect home. She was the dream every young girl in town was told to aim for. But perfection, as it turns out, is often just a beautifully painted mask, one that hides the fractures underneath. Behind the closed doors of their mansion, cracks had started to appear. Tiny at first, almost invisible, but growing. Stacy's rehearsals grew longer. Her eyes grew more distant. Her smile, once effortless, became something practiced. And though Robert remained successful and composed on the surface, the emotional distance between them widened with every passing day. No one noticed, because no one wanted to. In Fairfield, the Mitchells were perfect, and no one dared question what perfection might be hiding. To the townspeople, he was everything a priest should be: soft-spoken, compassionate, a gentle smile that calmed even the most anxious hearts. His sermons were thoughtful, filled with stories of faith and forgiveness. He visited the sick, comforted the grieving, and listened patiently to every troubled soul who walked into his confessional. For more than 20 years, he had been a pillar of spiritual life in Fairfield, a constant presence, a quiet force of good. But what no one in Fairfield knew was that Father Sean wasn't born Sean McAllister. Decades earlier, in another town far from Alabama, he had lived under a different name. He had served in a different parish and had been at the center of a dark, deeply buried scandal. A young woman had died under suspicious circumstances. There were whispers, rumors, but no formal charges. The church had acted swiftly and silently. To avoid publicity, they relocated him, changed his name, and gave him a new start in Fairfield, a second life built on secrecy. And it worked. For years, no one suspected a thing. Father Sean buried the past beneath his priestly collar and lived as if nothing had ever happened. He rebuilt trust. He rebuilt his reputation. He became a friend, a mentor, and a spiritual guide to many, including one of the most powerful families in town, the Mitchells. Robert had known Father Sean since he was a boy, growing up under the shadow of that very church. When he married Stacy, it felt natural to bring her into that circle of faith. Stacy, raised in a devout Catholic home, found comfort in the church's rituals and in Father Sean's kindness. She came to him often, at first for confession, later for guidance. They would speak after Mass, sometimes for hours, about her children, her dance, her doubts, her loneliness. And slowly those conversations became something more personal, more vulnerable, more dangerous. Fairfield still saw Father Sean as a man of God, but Stacy was beginning to see something else, something beneath the cassock, something deeper, darker, and far more human. And in that forbidden space between devotion and desire, a terrible tragedy was quietly taking shape. Robert's business empire demanded more and more of his time. Late-night meetings, last-minute flights, endless phone calls that never seemed to end, even during dinner. When he was home, he wasn't truly present. His eyes were on his phone, his thoughts somewhere far away. And though he would occasionally kiss her goodnight or praise her performances, the warmth in their marriage had long since faded into routine. Stacy didn't blame him, not at first. She understood pressure, she understood ambition, but she was tired of feeling like an accessory to someone else's success. Her ballet career, though still celebrated, had become physically draining and emotionally hollow. She danced for audiences who adored her, yet no one ever truly saw her. So she turned to the one place that had always brought her peace, the church, and to the one man who actually listened, Father Sean. It started innocently, brief conversations after Mass, a gentle hand on her shoulder. He asked how she was, and genuinely waited for an answer. She told him things she hadn't shared with anyone, about the numbness, the disconnection, the ache of being surrounded by people but feeling completely alone. Father Sean listened with the patience of a man trained to absorb pain. He offered comfort, not just as a priest, but as someone who understood emptiness. He told her she deserved to be happy, that it was okay to question the life she'd been told was perfect. And Stacy slowly began to open the door, not to faith, but to something far more dangerous. There was a look in his eyes, not just compassion, but curiosity, longing. And one night, after a particularly emotional confession, something unspoken finally broke. The air was cold, the parking lot empty. He walked her to her car, like he always did, but this time, they didn't part with a simple goodbye. Their eyes met. The silence between them pulsed with tension. And then, it happened. A kiss. Software. Tentative. Forbidden. But once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. In that moment, Stacy didn't feel like a wife, or a mother, or a dancer. She felt alive. What she didn't realize was that she had just set a match to everything she had ever known, and the fire would soon come for them all. At first, it was thrilling. They met in hidden corners of the church after hours, in her car, parked under the cover of trees. On nights when Stacy claimed she had late rehearsals, they checked into cheap hotels under false names. She lied to Robert, lied to her friends, but the more she lied, the more alive she felt. Father Sean fed that feeling. He made her feel seen, desired, worshipped. For the first time in years, Stacy wasn't just a wife, or a mother, or a dancer. She was a woman being pursued, wanted, and that exhilaration was addictive. But with each stolen night came a deeper darkness. Father Sean, once so composed, so serene, began to change. What started as gentle affection became controlling behavior. He would call her constantly, demand to know where she was, who she was with. He started showing up unannounced, lurking in the background during her performances, watching her like a shadow. The line between passion and possession was disappearing. During one of their secret rendezvous, Stacy tried to pull away, just for a moment. She mentioned needing space, time to think, that maybe what they were doing wasn't right. Father Sean didn't take it well. In a fit of emotion, he grabbed her wrist. Hard enough to leave bruises. He apologized immediately, begging her forgiveness, falling to his knees. But Stacy could feel the shift. The man who once offered her comfort now frightened her. Still, she stayed. Why? Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the fear of losing the only person who had made her feel something real in years. Or maybe it was because secrets have a strange way of chaining us tighter the longer we keep them. By now, Stacy was lying to everyone, to Robert, to her children, to herself. What had begun as an escape had become a trap, and the man she had turned to for salvation was becoming her captor in plain sight. At first, the signs were subtle. Stacy became distracted. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore. She would vanish for hours, returning home with vague explanations. Extra rehearsals, visiting an old friend, needing time to rest before a show. Robert wanted to believe her. He loved her, or at least, he loved the version of her he had known, the elegant ballerina, the loving mother of his children. But something had changed, and it wasn't just her schedule, it was her spirit. She seemed somewhere else. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just the pressure of performing. But the doubt lingered like a shadow. Then came the night she forgot her phone at home. It lit up with a message, just one, from a number he didn't recognize, 3 words. "I miss you." That was all it took. Robert didn't explode. He didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, he did what he always did when the stakes were high. He gathered information. Within 24 hours, he'd hired a private investigator. Discreet, experienced, expensive. The man was instructed to follow Stacy during her upcoming ballet tour, to track her movements, photograph her interactions, and document every stop along the way. Robert wanted the truth, whatever it was, and he got it. Within days, the investigator returned with photos. Grainy, distant, but undeniable. Stacy, entering a hotel on the outskirts of town. Not alone, with Father Sean, the same man who had baptized their children, the same man who had dined at their table, prayed with them, smiled with them. Robert's heart didn't break. It calcified. The betrayal wasn't just infidelity, it was personal, it was spiritual, it was war. But Robert didn't scream. He didn't beg. He didn't leave. He waited and began planning. Not a divorce, not a confrontation, something far more permanent. As Stacy drove off, she felt the now familiar mix of anticipation and guilt twist in her stomach. The lie came easily now, too easily. She was meeting Father Sean again. Another night of secrecy, another night tangled in sheets and shadows. She arrived at the same remote hotel they always used. She parked behind the building to avoid being seen. He was already in the room, waiting, pacing, anxious. Their embrace was desperate, messy. There was no joy in it anymore. Only need. Need for escape, for validation, for each other. Even though both of them knew this couldn't go on forever. What they didn't know was that this would be their last night, because Robert wasn't at home. He was just minutes behind her. He had followed her from the moment she left the driveway. His car stayed 2 blocks back, silent, patient. He knew where she was going. He had been there before, but this time he didn't bring a camera. He brought a weapon. In the passenger seat lay a golf club, stainless steel, perfectly polished, heavy enough to end a life in one swing. He parked on the far side of the hotel lot, slipped through a side entrance, and moved like a ghost through the narrow halls. He already had the room number. The investigator had confirmed it hours ago. Inside the room, Stacy and Father Sean were arguing. She wanted to slow things down. He didn't. He was pushing her, again, telling her to leave Robert for good, to stop pretending, to run away with him. "Choose me," he said, "tonight." But before she could answer, the door burst open, and there he was, Robert, still, silent. His towering figure filled the doorway like a shadow of fate. In his hand, the golf club. Time froze. Father Sean moved instinctively, trying to protect her, but he never stood a chance. The first blow struck his skull with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed the wall. Stacy screamed, but Robert wasn't finished. He turned to her, eyes wild, breath shallow, voice shaking. "How could you?" And before she could speak, the second swing came down, hard, and just like that, it was over. When the police arrived minutes later, they didn't know what to expect. A domestic dispute, maybe a robbery gone wrong. What they found was something else entirely. Room 214. The door was slightly ajar. Blood trailed onto the hallway carpet. Inside, it was carnage. The curtains were drawn, the bed sheets twisted and stained. On the floor, 2 bodies, one male, one female, both unrecognizable at first glance due to the trauma. Stacy Mitchell, lying on her side, her ballet-toned arms limp and bloodied. Eyes still open, lifeless, still wearing the makeup she'd carefully applied just hours before. Beside her, Father Sean, his clerical collar torn, skull crushed, a pool of dark crimson soaking through the cheap hotel carpet, and sitting between them, Robert Mitchell, silent, still, his hands covered in blood, the golf club resting beside him like an extension of his rage. He didn't resist arrest, didn't speak, didn't cry. When the officers asked him to stand, he did. When they cuffed him, he didn't flinch. The only words he said were soft, almost inaudible. "Where are my children?" The officers exchanged glances. No one answered. The scene was documented inch by inch. Photos, blood samples, shattered phones, personal belongings. A wedding ring, stained red, lay near the nightstand. 2 half-empty glasses of wine, a Bible, open to a page that spoke of temptation and wrath. News of the double homicide spread through Fairfield like wildfire. By dawn, the quiet town was swarming with reporters. People gathered outside the hotel, eyes wide, hands over their mouths. Stacy Mitchell, the town's darling. Father Sean, the town's shepherd. Both dead, at the hands of the man they thought was the pillar of control and dignity. The perfect image the Mitchells had so carefully crafted was shattered. What remained was a town in mourning, a family destroyed, and a question echoing louder than ever before. How could something so beautiful end in something so brutal? Fairfield, once a quiet and proud community, was now ground zero for national headlines. News vans lined the streets, talk shows speculated endlessly, tabloids plastered Stacy's ballet photos beside blood-spattered crime scene shots. Everyone had an opinion, and no one knew the full truth. When the trial began, the courthouse was packed to the walls. Reporters, curious locals, and complete strangers all wanted to witness what they were calling the perfect family's perfect collapse. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, intense. The prosecution painted Robert as a cold-blooded killer. They described a man consumed by jealousy, a man so prideful, so controlling, that he couldn't bear the humiliation of being betrayed. They showed the crime scene photos, the twisted bodies, the weapon, the blood. They highlighted how Robert had stalked his wife, how he planned the attack, how he walked into that hotel room fully intending to kill. They wanted the maximum sentence, life in prison, no parole. But the defense had a different story. They described Robert as a broken man, not a monster, but a husband who had been pushed to the brink. They told the jury about the betrayal, about the lies, about watching the woman he loved fall into the arms of a man he trusted, a man who had baptized his children, who had sat at his dinner table. And then they turned their attention to Father Sean. They brought forward documents from decades earlier, sealed church records, buried police reports. They exposed the priest's past, the suspicious death of a young woman in another state, the quiet relocation, the name change. They revealed his manipulation, his possessive behavior, his obsession with Stacy. Suddenly, the story wasn't so black and white. Was Robert a murderer? Yes. But was he a cold, calculating killer? Or a man driven mad by betrayal, by grief, rage, and heartbreak? The courtroom was divided, the public even more so. Each new witness brought fresh tension. Each piece of evidence shifted sympathy back and forth like a pendulum. And as the trial wore on, one question echoed louder than the rest. Was this justice, or was this vengeance? After weeks of testimony, dozens of witnesses, and endless media frenzy, the moment of truth finally arrived. The jury returned to the courtroom, eyes heavy, expressions unreadable. The air inside was still, electric, suffocating. Robert Mitchell sat motionless, no emotion on his face, not fear, not hope, just a deep, blank stillness, like a man suspended between two worlds. The judge asked the foreman to read the verdict. "All charges, not guilty." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Someone dropped a pen. A woman sobbed softly in the back row. Cameras flashed like lightning. Robert didn't move, didn't even blink. He had been prepared for life in prison. Now he was free. But free to what? Though the justice system had spoken, the court of public opinion remained divided. To some, Robert was a wronged husband, a man driven to the edge by betrayal, whose rage was human, even justified. To others, he was still a killer, a man who took 2 lives in a moment of fury and walked away without punishment. But the one person Robert couldn't escape judgment from was himself. He didn't celebrate. There was no relief, no redemption, just an ache, deep, permanent. He sold the mansion, liquidated his assets, packed what little remained of the life he once knew. Emily and Lucas, his children, were sent to live with their grandparents out of state. They were young, but old enough to understand that something irreversible had happened, old enough to feel the absence, to carry the weight of whispers, the shame of stares. Robert didn't fight for custody, didn't argue. He believed they deserved better than a father forever branded by blood. He moved far away, to a town where no one knew his name. No one knew Stacy. No one remembered the scandal that once gripped a nation. There he became a ghost, a man who wandered aisles in small grocery stores, who drank coffee alone, who read the same pages of old books without ever turning the next. Legally, he had been cleared, but in every mirror, every sleepless night, Robert still saw the man who swung that club, the man who ended it all. He was not in prison, but he would never be free. The Holy Trinity Church, when at once the heart of the community, slowly emptied out. Attendance dwindled, donations stopped, and then the doors closed for good. No sermons, no choir, no candlelit vigils. The building was later sold and converted into a community center, but the memory of what happened there, of who had served there, lingered like a stain no renovation could cover. The dance academy where Stacy once taught quietly removed her name from the alumni list. Her photos were taken down, her achievements erased. It was as if the town, ashamed and heartbroken, tried to scrub her memory away. But you can't erase a tragedy. You can only learn from it. For years, the people of Fairfield whispered her story, not with celebration, but with caution. Stacy Mitchell became a modern parable, a tale of temptation, betrayal, and the fragile illusion of perfection. She wasn't remembered for her grace on stage. She was remembered for how far a person can fall when no one hears them breaking. And Father Sean, he became the symbol of what happens when power is protected, rather than questioned. His past should have raised alarms, but it was buried. And in that silence, tragedy took root. The lesson is this: no life is too perfect to unravel, no institution too sacred to be questioned, and no secret stays hidden forever. Sometimes the cost of silence is everything.